And watchers, welcome.
Mm-hmm.
I think
Welcome, everybody.
Good day.
it was the first time I actually said that without having to correct myself and rethink. Like, oh yeah, watchers. So we're starting to get used to this.
Yeah.
When you say watchers, that sounds like a little creepy. Hey,
Watchers.
watchers. Like when you think about in a movie, if someone's called the Watchers,
Yeah,
that's typically not a good thing.
that's
No.
fair.
Yeah.
Well, viewers?
Stalkers.
Viewers seems too professional level of production beyond where we're at. Hello, viewers.
Hello, viewers. Well, you did your little
Stay classy, Airdrie.
welcome to the news.
This is true. All right, well, let's get into it. We've got 5 questions this week. So our first one is, does Living Springs support Israel? And if so, how?
So we had some discussion about what this question meant before the podcast started. If the person means, does Living Springs send from the general giving any money to Israel or any organizations in Israel? The answer is no, we do not. We have missionaries that we support in different areas of the world, most of whom we have relationship with, and that's how that support starts. And currently we don't support any ministries in Israel.
If the question becomes broader, which is kind of the way I imagined it, was how do we support Israel in backing of any kind? And I think that really does get to a bigger question of what is Israel's role, is I guess the deeper question there if you read the question that way. I don't see that the New Testament lends itself to assuming that there's a need to support Israel in large, direct ways. And I think the church shifts. There's a big shift in the way that the view of Israel was in the New Testament, from Paul's writings to Hebrews. Romans 11 is a big one that's regularly cited, talking about how we've got to support Israel. But even there, if you understand the timing and context there, Paul's writing of Israel has been kicked out of Jerusalem, and when he's writing Romans, it would have been then coming back in. And it's an immediate kind of time thing versus later on and in the distant future.
Did you just say Israel's been kicked out of Jerusalem?
At the time of the writing of Romans. And the church in Rome was largely Gentile. And the passage of Romans 11...
But did you say Israel was kicked out of Jerusalem?
Sorry, Jews were kicked out of Jerusalem.
Okay.
Sorry.
Okay. I'm good. I'm with you now. Because I was
Jews were
like,
kicked
how
out-
did they do that?
Jews were kicked out of Jerusalem and were slowly coming back in at the writing of Romans. And it's not writing of Rome. Rome was built, not written. Not in a day, though. I don't know. I've seen a big shift in my thinking there with the church's interaction with Israel and all those pieces.
Now, you said that in the New Testament you don't really see a reason to support Israel financially or whatever, if that's what you were going to talk about. But where does that thinking come from then? Because I've heard this in evangelical circles forever, and my understanding is it's linked to an end times idea, right? That when all the Jews return to Israel, then the end will happen. Jesus will come back. So, like, I've even heard some ministries where people are like getting you to send in money so that we can send people of Jewish descent back to Israel. Is that...
And the sending back, a lot of that does come from Romans 11. So Israel saved, the end of chapter 11, so 11:25. For I do not want you to be ignorant, brothers, of this mystery, so you will not be wise in your own sight. The partial hardening that happened to Israel until the full member of the Gentiles has come in. And so all of Israel will be saved, just as is written. The deliverer will come out of Zion. He will turn away ungodliness from Jacob. And this is the covenant from me with them when I take away their sins. With respect to the gospel, they are enemies for your sake. But with respect to election, they are dearly loved for the sake of the fathers. I missed the... Sorry, I'm missing the part there. But I know maybe it's earlier in Romans 11.
But there is also a Bible verse that talks about, I think it's in 2 Corinthians, but I could be totally wrong, where Paul's collecting money for the poor in Israel, and he's talking about that they owe them a physical or a financial debt because of the spiritual debt or the spiritual heritage they got from Israel.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah,
And
that's
so
Another
there is a
passage-
verse there, but I can't think of where it is off the top of my head.
And again, I would make the argument that I think even those passages are more referring to an immediate context than an ongoing, everlasting
I'm not discussing
Yeah.
the interpretation of those scriptures. I'm just saying there is another verse that I can't think of the address of right now that does relay the idea of the church owing a financial debt to Israel for the spiritual blessing that they received.
But even, O Israel, talking about, I'll bless those who bless you and I'll curse those who curse you. That passage is regularly used in those types of conversations as well. But if we see the shift that takes place, I think, very clearly in the New Testament of shifting the fulfillment of what all the promises and everything in Israel into Jesus, which is, I believe, what the New Testament lines up with, then all of those took place in Israel. Jesus is the new temple, the new promised nation, and is all the people being restored back to God. And so a lot of that language, if you follow from the way that I've learned to view it, a lot of the trajectory in the New Testament, the talk about Israel is often fulfilled in Jesus. And so even, the new temple and all those pieces.
Where I see the potential for trouble is in the evangelical movement, where the idea of support for Israel has meant agreement with everything that Israel has done.
Yeah.
Any missile strikes Israel does are just and righteous. Anything that they do gets the thumbs up from me at evangelicals. Yeah. And I go, and I'm not saying that they've done bad. I'm not saying they're wrong. I'm saying, but you can't give a carte blanche to a human government because of their ancestry in Abraham.
Totally.
I struggle with that, and I can remember Brian Zahn, who has gone to Palestine many times, doing missions work and meets with Christians in Palestine. And after one bombing of Palestine, he put on social media, even if your theology means you have to agree with everything that Israel does, can you not at least abide by the words of Jesus and pray for your enemies if you consider all Palestinians enemies?
Yeah.
He's like, forgetting the fact that in Palestine there are a lot of our brothers and sisters in Christ there.
Yeah.
And so, do I have a problem with people supporting Israel? No, I think that's totally fine. People can give money and lend support to whatever they want to lend support to. Where I think we've kind of missed the boat sometimes is that we have just gone carte blanche agreement with everything Israel does because we're evangelicals. Yeah. And that I go, and not that I'm on the other side and I'm condemning things that Israel have done. There's times when I go, I don't know. I haven't read enough. I haven't researched enough to have an informed opinion on that. So I will just abstain from having an opinion.
Yeah. I think a lot of people, when they hear any kind of talk even around that level that you're addressing, Doug, though, I've seen people accused of being anti-Israel for not having full support.
Right, yeah.
Right?
But I would again say, the difference between supporting and agreeing.
Totally. Well, yeah,
it's not the same thing.
Yeah, if you don't have full agreement even then, I've seen people tossed under the bus of being anti-Israel. For me to disagree with the actions of whatever leadership is in place in Canada does not make me anti-Canadian. In fact, I think it would make you the opposite, right? To value what is the proper living out of Canadian values, I think to be able to speak into a disagree is important as well.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah, so.
Yeah, and I even think of one of my younger brothers went to Israel and spent some time there, and while he was doing that, he was living with some Jews, obviously, or Israel people, and they were talking about Judaism, their religion, or the religion of the Jews, right? And he was just very interested. I remember him telling me that they're not interested in converting anybody, right? No. Like they're not trying to bring more people in, which is so different than our Christian beliefs of, go into the world and make known Jesus, right? Yeah. And all that to say, it just lined up with, a book that we read last spring and just some other thoughts I've been having of how we blend historical Old Testament with what we believe now. Yeah. And yes, obviously that is our heritage as Christians. That's where Jesus came from and all the rest. But Jesus definitely started something new. Yeah. And even these guys that my brother was roommates with were agreeing with that. Yeah. Like, we're not into Jesus and all the stuff you Christians are doing. Like, we're not part of you. Yeah. Whereas Christians on the other side, sitting here in Airdrie, Alberta, regularly try to be part of the Jews, right? We think that we're a part of them, but they don't necessarily think that about us, right? So it did cause me to think about some things as, a question, do I support Israel? Makes me think differently, when I understand those things.
Yeah. Well, I think there's you see the variety in what that means in the New Testament.
Yeah.
Because you see in Jewish cultures in the New Testament, they took those Old Testament practices and then reincorporated them in new ways in Christ.
Yeah.
But when they went to Gentile places and preached the gospel, they didn't do that.
Yeah.
They just said, follow Jesus.
Yeah.
Right.
Right?
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah. I will say the supporting of Israel. I know also sometimes the anti-Israel stuff gets conflated too. Well, maybe don't even think they should have their own nation, which I've heard that, and I don't think that's fair at all. I think coming out of World War II, it was very important that Israel have its own borders to protect itself, to all those pieces. But yeah, how it fits into our theology and support that way.
Yep.
All right. Question 2, general intro question. What are your reflections on the events of the past weeks and the uprising that has occurred? Would this have happened to the same extent had we not been in lockdown, i.e., are they in any way connected? Great question.
I have no idea, and I've heard people who have opinions on both sides, and I honestly go, it's conjecture. The things in the States seem to have been boiling to a tipping point and moving towards a tipping point for a number of years.
Yeah.
And were those two connected? Possibly. If coronavirus didn't happen, would there have still been the same response? Maybe not. Maybe not 2 weeks ago. Maybe it would have happened last week with the killing of that black man last week.
Yeah.
Maybe it would have happened in 3 months. I think that the systemic racial problems that are in the States were coming to the surface and have been coming to the surface for a number of years. And if you've watched them, you've seen that unrest. You've seen other times where there have been those protests. They haven't had this sustained power. But the fact that if you look, they would rise up. They'd have a little bit of a time, and then they would decrease. But each time it got a little longer and a little bigger. And so how much are they overlapped? I think that's an impossible thing to answer, frankly. But the issue of that systemic racism that you see, that's been brewing for centuries.
I don't know that I would think that they're connected. I mean, maybe it heightened it in some way, but I was in Tampa Bay in 2016 at a Christian conference, at a church conference, when there was one of the shootings where a white policeman had shot a black person, right? And I was just, I think I have a multi-ethnic family, and I think to some degree I know stuff about race and that, but I was way in over my head being in the United States at a conference with Christian people, and the chatter and debate that happened. They even shut down a couple of sessions of the conference and put a panel on stage instead. Said, we're bringing up our leaders right now that are here in this room, and we're going to talk about this because it's a big deal.
Kudos for them.
Yeah.
Kudos to them
It was awesome.
for handling it, doing something.
Yeah.
But
Right.
the things they were talking about, I was not aware of. Like, I don't live in that culture. I don't know it, right? I was glad that I was there because I was enlightened on a lot of things, but some of the things that are said, I was just like, whoa, like, this is bizarre world compared to what I live in. So in that being said, that's 4 years ago. Yeah, these things have just continued to heighten and heighten and heighten, and I think we hit a massive boiling point.
Yeah, I'd agree with both of you guys that I think it would have gotten to where it is today regardless of timing and regardless of coronavirus. I do think there could be a practical element where it's giving the people, the ability to see more stuff because a lot more people are at home following the news and reading stuff more online. But regardless, I think I saw a meme. I love memes. And I think they can speak so much truth. It was, so what's the right way to protest? I had a bunch of different pictures from different protests and movements that have happened over the last probably 5 or 6 years, from protests with signs to things in judicial courts in the States to Colin Kaepernick with his knee and all these different places. Like, and each one of them had the picture of that thing and the way that they were protesting and said, no, not that way, no, not that way, no, not that way, no, not that way. And then at the bottom was the pictures of the riots in a city that was in shambles right now.
Wow.
And said, so is this not okay finally? Because you weren't listening then, kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I go, maybe there's a practical element that has expedited it happening with coronavirus, people being sick of being stuck at home, maybe, but I think it was on its way there regardless, and I think it's due time that these voices need to be heard. I'm not saying I agree with everything that has gone on and how it's all been done, but whatever has been done so far, people have not listened, and so to get to this point, I hope people listen now.
Well, none of us
agree.
are old enough to have been alive during the civil rights movement that the states went through in the 60s. But
Yeah.
I would imagine if you went back and you looked at that movement, it probably followed a similar thing in that it started in small pockets and it was small moments of voices rising up that grew until it became a massive movement like you're seeing right now. I don't imagine that Martin Luther King Jr. just stood up one day and gave the "I Am a Dream" speech, and everybody went, "Oh, yeah." Like, you know what I mean? Like there was a period of time, and I think right now, people who are looking at this moment and they're seeing it as an isolated moment haven't been paying attention to what's happened before.
Yeah. Well, even Martin Luther King, he started his big career right after Rosa Parks with the bus and the Montgomery bus protests. And so
and that's what I'm saying.
He partnered with another event.
That started. There were pieces that started that built into this thing.
Yeah, and Malcolm X was working at the same time, and all these different pieces all came together. Absolutely. So, then let's move on to our next question. These last four are all connected. So, considering the phrase "Black Lives Matter," how do we need to change our attitudes as white people? Recognizing there has been a strong reaction against it in some circles, is white privilege a fair phrase?
There's a lot of questions in this question.
Yes.
Considering the phrase "Black Lives Matter," how do we need to change our attitudes as white people? I think we need to demonstrate, especially as followers of Christ, that Black Lives Matter. That there's been a strong reaction against it puzzles me and angers me. It just makes no sense at all to me. That and the fact that it's seemingly led by conservatives and evangelicals really makes me angry.
I completely agree.
That Jesus shows care for the outcast, care for the minority, care for those who are oppressed. You know, that's the side Jesus always was on. And that evangelicals can't, at least, even if they're not going to join in the protests, can't say, yes, Black lives do matter, is mind-boggling to me. I saw a meme, to quote memes, I saw a meme that said people who say all lives matter when someone says Black lives matter. If Jesus was speaking and said, blessed are the poor, would they have interrupted him and said, no, isn't everybody blessed?
Totally. I saw one on the same. It was a Jesus and about 99 sheep, and Jesus was leaving to go to the one, and there were sheep holding up signs, all sheep matter, and like all that kind of stuff. It's like, get the point, right?
Yeah. Absolutely. That's my thoughts on that. I don't think you should have a reaction against it. To me, it makes sense, and we should say, yes, Black Lives Matter. Those are the ones that are being discriminated against. Those are the ones that are suffering. And white privilege, I don't know if I understand what the thought is, and I'm not opposed to the thought. Whether or not the wording is right or not, I have no idea. But definitely a white person has a head start. I remember seeing a video, and it was a man with a lineup of about 50 or 60 youth, and he was holding up a $100 bill, and he said, "All right, the first person who can run and take this $100 bill out of my hand is going to get it. But before we do that, here's what we're going to do." And he just started off going, if you were raised by a single parent, take a step back. Everybody who was it, take a step back. Right. If you are black or Hispanic, take a step back. And if you come from a low-income family, take a step back. And he did it to show that we don't all start at the same place. And it's not an even playing field. And it's not an even ground. And I understand that there would be people who are Caucasian who would go, what are you talking about? I don't have any privilege. But you're assuming that you're starting at the same baseline as somebody who's not like you, and that's just not true.
Well, and I think in Canada again, or in our culture, I will speak personally. I don't see that. I didn't know that I was starting from a place ahead of others. I had no idea.
I would say probably most people in Airdrie don't realize they're starting ahead of most people in Forest Lawn, Calgary.
That would be
completely
a really good statement.
So there are lots of different, and race is certainly a factor, and I'm not discounting that,
Yeah.
but we don't think about that.
Yeah, absolutely. Phil Vischer wrote a really good article on the Holy Post. I shared it on my Facebook as well. And the article was just simply titled, "Racial Injustice Has Benefited Me, a Confession." And he just kind of walked through his life, starting with his great-great-grandfather, who had an opportunity to build a house in the 1920s in an environment that black people weren't even allowed to build a house in, and the laws were at that time set up to actually keep black people from owning property,
Yes.
so on and so forth. And then he traces that all through each generation, right up to the point where even his then social circles were based on the neighborhoods that his grandfather had built in the 20s. His social circles are then built by it, and he's the one who created the VeggieTales. And would he have had the career that he did without being in the white circles with the people with the money and the broadcasting networks and all of his success? And he traced his own life back, and the way it kind of is written is that we can look at our lives and go, oh man, I don't realize that 4 or 5, maybe 6 generations have benefited me where I start at. Yeah. And it was a fantastic read. Really
I would say it's the problem is that evangelicals will find the person who started in abject poverty or the person who didn't have all of the advantages that maybe someone who's white or somebody in Airdrie or somebody in a different class did and did succeed. Right? So they'll find that outlier who rose from nothing. And they go, look, see, it's possible. And nobody's saying it's not possible. What they're saying is, we didn't start with the same playing field.
Totally.
That person is the exception to the rule. And if you're going to do that, you should look at the percentage of people who are rising up out of their social class. Because if you were to say, you know, okay, I would venture to say, and I could be wrong, and I'm open to be wrong, but I would venture to say that if you went to the States, the more people who are black live in a lower income neighborhood and lifestyle than people who are white. And so if you have one black guy who rises up and becomes a billionaire, that's great. But what percentage of whites are doing the same thing? And then you can't debate that you have a head start. You can't debate that at all. I think where Caucasians get offended is the word privilege. That you're making me feel like I'm privileged, and we are. And I'm not debating that. But I think the term puts people off without them stopping to think about the truth behind it.
Which, I don't know if you guys saw Louis Giglio and all the heat he got in this past week.
No.
He was addressing and talking about this exact thing. He's like, maybe we should actually just call it white blessing. And
that would be,
well, the way he phrased it though was like everybody came after him hard for it because your blessing has actually come at the cost of slavery and all these other things have come there. So personally, I think privilege is the proper word, as offensive as it really is because it's offensive because of everything that we are standing on top of, kind of thing. It's not a blessing from God. It's actually a privilege that's been given to us from previous generations.
I think that people have I think the challenge with the word privilege is that people are always looking at someone else and going, well, they're more privileged than me. Right? And, you know, for somebody who would be Caucasian, who's middle class, they go, I'm not privileged because there's somebody who's...
Jeff Bezos has more money than me.
You know what I mean? There's always somebody ahead of me. And that's human nature, is to look at the person who's more privileged than me and be envious of them, rather than look at the person who's less privileged than me and say, how can I help them? And I think there's a natural thing that people go, I'm not privileged. I'm the norm, because in America we've presented the middle class as this is the goal. Right? And so I'm not privileged. I'm where we're all supposed to be. And so it's a hard thing to get your head around it.
Or even with a capitalist mindset of how we earn money and how we make our living and how our economy works, then when you use the word privilege, I've heard people get really upset because they think, no, I have the right to earn and get whatever I can, right? But yes, the problem with that thinking is forgetting or not understanding where they started from, right? That, yes, no one's debating in our economy and the way we live that, yes, you can get as much as you can get, but you're starting ahead of everybody else. Right?
Absolutely. Totally.
All right, do you want to move on to the next one?
Sure.
Is there a place for protesting, and should we be participating? Would you? If not, how do you recommend we engage if we feel strongly?
My son asked me this when the protests all started in the States.
Yeah.
He's like, what do you think of all the protests? I said, I think that they are a very valid expression of what those people
Totally.
have endured for centuries.
Yeah.
And he followed that up with, would you do it? And I said to him, yes.
Yeah.
If I was an American,
Yeah.
I would be spending days down in these protests right
Yeah.
now. Absolutely. I have not gone to the ones in Calgary because I personally,
Yeah.
and nothing against people who are there, but I don't see the benefit in Calgary, Alberta, protesting a problem that's in the States.
Right.
And so I haven't gone down because I think I don't know. I know there's people who do, and good on them, and that's great. But I just don't see how that can make a difference. But if I was American, I would be involved in those protests, fighting for, and I would be encouraging my church, if I was a pastor in the States, to get involved and say, this is the heart of Jesus. We need to help people that we see are oppressed.
Yeah.
I think it was 2 weekends ago, you talked about Jesus' job description, right? And
Yeah,
you talked about
absolutely.
the oppressed in them.
Yeah.
And so when you look at the oppressed, if we're going to do the work of Jesus, it's liberty to the oppressed.
Yeah.
And those protests are accomplishing that goal.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Or aimed at accomplishing that goal. Time will tell whether they do or not.
Yeah.
I heard a comedian say once that he was against protesting, but he didn't know how to show it. And I just think as you were talking, I'm like, yeah, obviously that is the way that we can show our displeasure for what is happening in our world, right?
Yeah.
And yeah, I don't think we should set things on fire and beat people up, but I definitely think there's a place to say this is not okay.
I think that I wonder how many of the people who are protesting were the ones who were lighting things on fire.
True,
and
yes.
beating people up. Not in any way the same thing, but after Vancouver lost in the Stanley Cup Finals a number of years ago, they lit the city on fire. That was not almost all of that was not Vancouver Canucks fans.
Right.
It was a small group of people who wanted to just cause anarchy.
Yeah.
And I think when you look at what's happening in the States, you see a movement of people across all races, which is really cool, coming together to say, this must stop. And in that environment, there is an opportunity for a small number of people to go do bad. And I think it's unfortunate that things like Fox News have put them together to try and shut up the protests because it makes them uncomfortable. Sorry if you're a big Fox News fan and I listen to Fox News.
I have seen a lot of videos, and again, this does not mean it's all of them, that it's representative of everything. But I saw a number of videos too where there were black people trying to stop white people from doing vandalism during the midst of all this. Guys, this is causing the problem. They're going to blame us. Please stop it. And standing and protecting businesses and stuff like that. Again, that's not the whole picture, I'm sure, but it's got to be representative of some percentage of it for me. And going, the anarchy has just started and people want to participate in it, so they are. And are starting off at.
But I think when you think about the millions of people who are protesting in the States, you think about the small number. The first couple of nights there were issues. Absolutely. But the vast majority of those protests are going off without incident. Without a negative incident, I should say. Lots of positives, amazing good things, and yet it's the few
the
problems and where violence erupts or where a building gets on fire, they get so much attention that it undermines the millions of people in every other city who are protesting the right way.
But I also think this is one thing I've kind of pondered on the last little bit, and I guess quickly to directly answer the question, I think there is a place for protesting. I think we should be participating. I would be, again, if it were in the States, but even right now, just with 3 little ones at home and the risk of coronavirus right now, I go, that's not the place for me as a family. Not saying I'm justifying it, but with the level of riots and all those pieces, my first thought was, I'd want to encourage the Jesus way of doing things. And then I began thinking about that deeply. Jesus flipped over and destroyed the tables and all those kind of pieces and would have destroyed personal property. And the issue of the pigs, casting all the demons into the pigs. And how many years maybe worth of income did he destroy for that thing, allowing that to happen? I'm not saying that Jesus is okay with all rioting and all destruction of personal property, but Jesus was okay with it in the right timing, in the right place.
I disagree. I think that Jesus was God.
Yep.
And we would say as Christians, Jesus never sinned.
Yeah.
So he was able to do those things
Yeah.
and be righteous.
Totally, and that's what I'm saying. Jesus is not okay with all of it.
Hang on. What I'm saying is, I don't trust any human being
Yes.
to say, God has called me to destroy property and it's okay.
I wouldn't disagree with you there. I'm more, I guess, saying I'm leaving the door open that it's not all wrong. That it could be possible. I'm not saying I agree with any one human doing it, but I've seen so many, again, evangelicals saying it's just never okay to do that, and that's not okay. And I'm not saying what level, what percentage, what person has the ability to discern those things. But it wasn't out of Jesus' realm to do that. So the door is not, in my mind, completely slammed shut. I don't think the level that it's been done. I don't think the places it's been done. I don't think to the extent or the heart of it has been done properly. I agree with all that. But I'm saying I don't think the door is completely slammed shut.
I am surprised at you, Kyle.
Why is that?
Because you normally are the
You're
way
the
of
guy
the
wearing
pacifist.
the bicker shirt and saying like no to anything.
I am typically anti-violence, and this is where it's really thrown me off as I thought about that, as I went to close that door completely.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying to what level, or even if it's even in this circumstance, in the protest, I just go, I don't know if I can close that door entirely as a result of Jesus' actions where he did it. And I'm not saying any human has the ability to say and justify, Jesus did it so I can burn this building down.
I think the difference is you're talking in the realm of theoretical,
Yes.
and I'm talking in the realm of real.
Fair enough.
I'm saying, no, you cannot. I don't trust anyone who would go and do that to say, no, I absolutely heard from God right, and he told me that I could go and do this thing. Plus the fact, when you think about the temple,
Yeah.
that was Jesus' home.
Yes.
I can do
Yeah.
what I want in my home.
Yeah.
And if we believe Jesus was God, he was in his own house.
Yes.
Yeah, I did say that to somebody this week because somebody brought up the Jesus in the temple, and
Yeah.
I was like, yeah, that's not rioting in the streets with other people's property.
Yeah. No, the bigger one is the demons thrown into the pigs who wouldn't have been
Yeah.
a Jew, who wouldn't have been following God. Somebody who is outside of God. I don't think his actions there are a great witness to draw somebody into the promises of God. But I don't know where all that
But
lands.
Jesus didn't destroy the pigs.
No, but Jesus sent them out at their request and allowed them to go there, which then destroyed the pigs. And he knew it was going to happen.
How do you know Jesus knew it was going to happen? You're assuming that Jesus, within the context of his humanity, was operating with the omniscience of God that was able to see the future. And yet you see countless times through the Gospels where Jesus asks questions, not seemingly because he knows the answer, but seemingly because he wants to find out what the answer is. So within the realm of the divinity and the humanity of Christ, there is this tension where I think Christ had to give up his ability to see all things at all times, including the future.
I agree. I would agree with you there.
So if that's the case, Jesus didn't do it knowing they would do that. He could have said, yes, go over there, because if you're harassing pigs, you're not harassing people.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think you're right. So I will retract my points.
All right.
So undo all that video. But I'm too lazy to go back and edit. So if you saw it, you saw it.
Well, the point, I think we're supposed to, that this is a conversation. So
Totally.
we don't have to undo it.
Yeah.
This is what we're doing. And I think there's been lots of times as we've had these conversations on the Q&A podcast that we have swung each other to different positions.
Totally.
Yeah.
Because
I
we're
think
sharing,
that's good.
this is all raw stuff.
Yeah.
And yeah, this is really real right now. And we should be building our theology and building our practices out of these conversations.
But we haven't spent 4 hours preparing these responses.
Yes.
These are off the cuff.
Yeah.
All right, and then our last question. While we may not feel the impact of black racism here in Canada, like in some places in the States, there are parallels. Example, Indigenous people groups. How should we be thinking and engaging, supporting, or lifting up minorities such as these?
Well, I would say that if you're white in the States, you don't feel the impact of black racism either.
That's true.
Right? And so I think it is recognizing where racism happens, recognizing where you see it, and responding it to deal with that injustice
Yeah.
and to bring it to an end, or do everything you can to bring it to an end, and to stand with the minority and to stand with the oppressed, to try and bring liberty to them.
Yeah. And I think that looks different for each person, right? Again, in social media, I've seen a lot of things posted about this, and everybody's got a different opinion on how each person needs to take place. For, well, I guess all of us with kids and families at home, we can't just take off and go protest for the next 5 weeks or necessarily make our lives all about that. Not that we can't have that in every area of our life, but our lives cannot be fully there and also still honor everything that God has called us to. But I think it's going to look different in different levels of engagement for each person that the Holy Spirit's going to deem. But I think the universal ones are, start to listen for voices that are, it's easy to not hear those voices when you're in a place of privilege. For myself, for the last year, one of the things I've been trying to do is read theology books, which I'd regularly do, but try to get different voices than I normally would. So I've read a couple of black theologians. I've read a couple people who are Messianic Jews. Read a lot more women than I may normally have instead of just picking white guys with. So trying to hear voices is something each one of us need to, I think, take practice in doing. I think we need to all stand against it in places where it's readily seen in front of us. Yep. I think far too often, and myself included, have I been in a room where a comment or a assumption or something has been made, and
off-colored joke.
Totally. And my silence, it says that I am okay with that. Right? And so I think we as followers of Christ, who if we believe that the image of God is imprinted in every single human being, we cannot stand for that in any level, whether it be in jest or in violence. And so we need to be making stands against that wherever we find ourselves in life, period. And I think those are both universal, no matter what your situation in life is.
And I think we also need to be allowing the Holy Spirit to show us where we have racist problems, racist attitudes, racist mindsets that maybe we've never even thought about, right? Because there can be things that are said that we could just be blind to. It could be the culture we grew up in, and yet God wants to speak to us and go, hey, that is not okay. We need to be willing to listen to that. Today, if you hear God's voice, do not harden your heart. Most of the time I find when God is speaking and I'm hearing his voice, it's because he wants to challenge a thought. And he wants to challenge a mindset. He wants to challenge a way of one of the ways I'm doing life. And it's easy to harden my heart and go, well, no, I've always been this way, or excuse it. Well, no, this is just the way I was raised. We were all raised some way, and that is not an excuse for embracing racist or wrong attitudes.
Absolutely.
The thing I love about Jesus' call and the way he's made us as individuals and the body of Christ is just that we are all different. Like we have personality, we have gifts, we have talents, we have things that God has given us for a reason. I remember as a kid growing up in an evangelical church, there's been lots of things that have come up through the years and through churches where it's been like, we all need to get on board and champion this. And I remember watching that as a kid and teenager and thinking, there'd be a cause that would come up and, there'd be someone on the stage that would give an announcement, this is what we're doing. But the whole church would not get into it. And it really frustrated me because I'm like, this seems like such a big thing. And the person who's leading it is so passionate about it. I was just like, why does that happen? But then as I started to think of my theology and understand that as I grew older, I thought, no, that's okay. Like there should be people championing that cause. Like they have a passion for it and they're rallying other people that would have a common passion and gifts and talents to go out for that cause. But then there is other causes too. Like if the whole church was just a hand, when we talk about the body of Christ, we wouldn't accomplish a whole lot. But we have a whole, building full on a weekend service here in our church of people with different passions, different talents, different gifts, and different opportunities that Jesus is going to put in front of us to do the right thing. And when it comes to racism, each one of us is going to be challenged by God in a different way to use the gifts and talents we have and the opportunities we have to do the right thing and to be the voice where we need to be the voice. So I don't think we need to all be the same on the same page all the time in what we're doing, but we all do need to follow Jesus' call, as you just said, right?
I agree. When I heard something recently that I really appreciated, the guy was talking about learning to hear other voices, and he said the question you should ask people when they want to start an argument is give me the best argument for the other side of what you're arguing. So let's say one of the first one that's coming to my mind that I've really been challenged by was when I first saw the language of defund the police. I was so against that. I'm like, that's so dumb. Like, we're just going to let anarchy, and I didn't understand it.
Yeah.
And then as I began to read about it, my understanding has grown, which I think a lot of us just react out of where we first understand and don't get to understand things. When I finally saw an actually well thought out explanation of defund the police, I began thinking of some of the conversations I've had with police friends who feel way overwhelmed, even pastor friends who feel way overwhelmed in certain situations. And the whole idea that I've come to understand, and maybe it's not representative of everybody who's saying defund the police, of saying, why are we putting all the money into the police to deal with the mental health issues on the streets and addictions on the streets? And why don't we take some of the money instead of just putting people who arrest you, put you in jail, let you back out of the streets, why don't we make counselors available to people in the streets? Why don't we make addictions programs more readily available to help people? And I go, wow, once I learned to understand that, my reaction really shifted. And so I think learning, again, to hear these stories, to understand them, worst case scenario, you come out in the same place you were, but you better understand the opposite side. Best case scenario, maybe you've learned something and changed your position versus just an immediate emotional reaction to something that we're hearing. And so I think in the issue of race and the parallels that we have here, I think we need to learn to hear those voices and recognize that this is an issue in our culture regardless. And so we've got to go out of the way to learn it.
I agree.
But I think what you're talking about is thinking. And in the world we live in today, and I can't speak to 100 years ago because I wasn't alive, but we live in an age of outrage and an age of sound bites.
Yep.
Yeah.
And so everything gets condensed down to a 6-second sound bite, and then there's a reaction to it.
Yep.
Instead of, yes, there are people who have a piece of Bristol board that says defund the police.
Yeah.
And people just react to that without going, what do you mean by that?
Totally.
Well, the reason it's a 3-word thing on a piece of Bristol board was because if they wrote on the Bristol board, we need to redesignate some of the funds that are going towards police services to other services that are much needed in our community, such as mental health, housing, youth, blah, 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 blah. Nobody would read the Bristol board.
Totally.
And so the person is trying to express a thought briefly and succinctly, I think, in a way to get the conversation going.
Yep.
But it doesn't actually start a conversation because instead somebody just reacts to the 3-word phrase. And we need to learn to communicate as a society.
Totally.
We need to learn to ask questions before we judge and to seek to understand before we want to be understood. Because what I see happening in society is this coming apart of our society, unraveling of our society, where people tune into the news that supports their own views, go on the social media posts that support their own views, and we are just getting more and more divided in our Western world. And I have said for years that it's the great irony that the United States of America have become so divided. And it's a great tragedy. Because, and the reality is, somebody, and it's more than one somebody, but there are people making billions of dollars off creating that outrage instead of causing people to think.
Absolutely. Well, if you've got further questions to everything we've talked about today, or if we got further thoughts, whatever, or just questions on something else, we'd love to have your questions. But thanks for tuning in or watching later, listening later, whatever it may have been. But thank you, and we'll see you for next week's episode.
See you later.